Welcome to today's deep dive, where our mission today is to unpack this really fiercely poetic, honestly highly provocative text. It's called The Lord's Whole Sword.
Yeah, it's quite a text.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, what we're looking at here is a first-person monologue, and it completely reimagines the divine feminine. Specifically, it's evoking the historical and cultural figure of Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Right, but definitely not in the way history usually frames her.
Exactly. Not as this passive, quiet vessel just kneeling in a manger. Instead, this source material positions her as an active primordial force. It's a huge shift.
It's massive. But before we really jump into the mechanics of how the author builds this argument, we need to establish some ground rules for you, the listener.
Yeah, that's incredibly important for this one.
Because, this source deals with some highly charged religious imagery. It radically reinterprets biblical figures and critiques, basically centuries of church history.
Right.
So we just want to be completely clear about our role here. We're taking a strictly impartial look at the ideas as they're constructed within this specific text.
Just looking at the framework.
Exactly. We aren't endorsing these viewpoints. We aren't validating any left-wing or right-wing theology, and we certainly aren't confirming any historical claims. We're just acting as your guides to map out the architecture of this specific writer's ideas.
And that impartial framework is so essential because, the thought experiment at the core of this text is just fascinating, regardless of your personal background.
It really is an incredible thought experiment.
Imagine for a second if one of history's most famous silent figures suddenly started speaking.
Yeah.
And imagine she explained that her silence, the quietness that the world had always assumed, was just, passive submission.
Right, that it wasn't submission at all.
Exactly. Imagine she told you her message was simply so intrinsically true, so fundamentally aligned with reality, that it didn't even need defending. It only needed telling.
Yeah, the author is completely shattering the frame we've been handed here. We are incredibly accustomed to historical figures, particularly women in ancient texts, basically just serving as passive vehicles for other people's narrative.
Oh, totally. Just props in someone else's story.
Right. And this text flips that dynamic by dismantling our traditional views of divine hierarchy right out of the gate. So the source text asserts something really foundational for the rest of its argument. It states, divinity does not rank itself.
Which is such a powerful line. And the text actually lists a really wide array of names humans have used for the sacred, just to illustrate this point, right?
Yeah, it covers a lot of ground.
It mentions Krishna, the Hindu avatar of preservation.
Sure.
Kali, the fierce force of destruction and time. Isis, the Egyptian goddess of magic. Christ, obviously.
Yeah.
Inanna, the ancient Sumerian deity of power.
Kuan Yin is in there too.
Right, the Buddhist embodiment of deep compassion. And Shakti, the primordial cosmic energy. So it's bringing all these figures together.
And the author argues these aren't competing deities trying to climb some cosmic corporate ladder.
Yeah, not a competition.
No, according to the text, every single one of these names, despite their vastly different cultural origins and historical baggage, they are simply a face turned toward the exact same undivided light.
It makes me think of how humanity has spent millennia essentially arguing over which color in a rainbow is the true rainbow.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Thanks, yeah.
Yeah.
We completely miss the fact that it's all just one single source of light hitting a prism.
Right.
The light isn't diminished because it fractured into red and blue and yellow.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be somehow completed if it just decided to be only red.
Exactly. But if we accept that premise, that the light is undivided and the divine doesn't rank itself, it immediately raises a psychological question.
Right, why did we do this?
Yeah, why did humanity become so obsessed with ranking our gods? And the author answers this by introducing this concept of a fear architecture.
That is such a loaded phrase, honestly.
Yeah.
Fear architecture.
It really is. The text argues that human beings started building, ladders instead of circles, because they couldn't trust the nature of love.
Ladders instead of circles. I love that imagery. Because a circle is egalitarian, right? There's no top or bottom.
Exactly. A ladder requires vertical climbing. The author posits that humanity was operating from a mindset of absolute scarcity.
Like there isn't enough to go around.
Right. They couldn't trust that love doesn't run out when it's shared. So people put their own specific god at the very top of a ladder, and then they called the ladder itself holy.
Instead of recognizing that only the love was holy.
You got it.
But, if you build a ladder And your entire societal structure relies on climbing higher and higher toward a single exclusive peak.
You eventually run out of rungs.
Exactly. You run out of rungs. So
Yeah.
the only way to feel like you're still climbing, or I guess to maintain your position of power, is to start pushing someone else down.
Yeah, and the text states this explicitly. When a human story cannot climb any higher, it reaches for someone to push down. And historically, the author points out, that downward pushing has almost always landed on a woman's name.
Wow. Yeah, and the examples the text uses for this mechanism are striking. It starts with Eve, right?
It does. It points out that Eve was blamed for a hunger that both figures actually felt in that garden.
Right. They were both there. They both ate.
Yeah, but the ladder builders needed someone to be below. They needed someone to hold the fault so the structure could remain intact.
That's so sad, but it makes perfect sense within that fear architecture. And then the author moves to Mary Magdalene, which I found fascinating.
Oh, the section on Magdalene is incredible. The text argues that Magdalene was essentially blamed into a shame she never even confessed to.
Right, like her presence as a primary witness at the empty tomb was just quietly rewritten over the centuries, rewritten into a reputation she didn't earn.
Yeah, and the rationale the text gives for this rewriting is so vital to understanding institutional psychology. It says, a woman arriving first with the truth was harder for the ladder builders to place than a woman arriving guilty.
That line is staggering. Let me repeat that for the listener. A woman arriving first with the truth was harder to place than a woman arriving guilty.
It's heavy.
It really is, because a guilty woman is infinitely easier for an institution to categorize than a truth-telling one.
Oh, absolutely.
If she's guilty, she fits perfectly into the hierarchy. She's at the bottom, she's a sinner, she needs saving, and the ladder works exactly as designed.
Right. The people at the top get to extend grace to the person at the bottom.
Right.
The system justifies itself.
Exactly. But if she is the one arriving with the absolute truth, well, she threatens the entire fear architecture.
She renders the ladder obsolete.
Right. So how does the narrator of our text define the blame that was placed on her specifically? Because she says she was blamed in the oldest way of all.
Yeah, so she says she was blamed not for what she did, but for what moved through her. The dynamic here is that a woman who becomes the doorway for the sacred also has to carry the blame for whatever fear walks through that doorway in the centuries that follow.
That is profound.
The narrator defines this brilliantly. She says, blame out of shame is what a ladder does to anyone standing at a rung it did not build.
But she completely refuses to accept that placement, doesn't she?
Oh, entirely.
She clarifies that she didn't come from a rung at all. She came from the light the ladder was trying to reach for all along.
Yeah, which is a massive power shift. And if she entirely rejects this human hierarchy, it begs the question, where does her power actually come from?
Right. What is her actual nature then?
Well, the author answers this not with traditional theology, but with physical, almost scientific metaphors.
Which I loved.
Yeah, the text introduces a core thesis that dreaming and being are one unbroken motion.
Dreaming and being are one unbroken motion. And to explain this, the author uses the physical world, right? Specifically, how a storm operates.
Yes, the storm metaphor is great.
Because a storm doesn't just suddenly exist as a spinning, categorized hurricane. It starts as unnamed pressure. It begins as warmth gathering out of formlessness.
Exactly. It has no eye, it has no name, but that pressure is the storm, just caught earlier in its arc.
Right. It's only later, when it organizes into something visible and destructive, that someone stands on the ground, gives it a name, and calls it real.
But the text is arguing that it was real from the very first breath of pressure.
It was always the storm.
Right. And the author also uses the example of a molecule to drive this home. A molecule begins as separate atoms, say hydrogen and oxygen, that just have potential.
Right, floating around separately.
Yeah. Then they bond, and suddenly water exists. And it possesses properties neither atom had on its own.
You don't ask which atom is more real than the other.
Exactly. Because understanding the bond dissolves that question entirely.
And this connects directly to our own human experience. The text tells the listener that your dreams are that pressure gathering. Your realities are that bond forming.
It's all the same process.
Yeah, it's like watching a Polaroid photo develop.
Yeah.
You know, you take the picture, and at first the film is just this gray, formless square.
Nothing to see it.
Right, but the image is already there, the chemistry is reacting. It's just taking time to become visible to the human eye.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, the author says there was never a wall between the dreaming and the being. Just a human story that told you to wait on one side of a door that was never actually locked.
Which is so liberating, and the philosophical implication of this physics lesson is basically all about visibility.
Right, like why does the undivided light fracture into different faces at all?
Exactly. Why do the atoms bond? The text argues that the undivided needs division to become visible at all.
Oh, I see.
Just like a single musical note needs other different notes to become a chord or a melody.
Otherwise, it's just a flat tone.
Right. The divine light needs a prism, meaning different names, different faces, to be seen and loved. No single face can hold the whole alone.
So, by establishing how the undivided becomes visible, the text provides the lens we need to look at how it rewrites one of the most famous narratives in human history.
The birth story in the manger.
Yes, the manger. The text has just established that no story about a bond can belong to only one half of the bond.
Right, so the story the world learned to call exclusively the son's story was actually never his to hold alone.
And the text explicitly rejects that traditional tableau we see in historical paintings or, on Christmas greeting cards.
Where she's just quietly kneeling.
Right. It says the mother does not kneel at the edge of the story so the son can stand at the center.
Which is such a powerful image to dismantle.
It really is. She is not just a vessel carrying water she didn't make. The narrator literally says, I arrived as the water.
She is describing herself as the primordial essence. And because the ancient world didn't have the language, or honestly the institutional room, to name her directly,
Yeah.
they named her by what she happened to be standing next to.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she uses an analogy here, comparing it to describing the entire ocean by only describing the shore it happens to be touching on a given day.
That is beautiful. And the imagery peaks with this specific line. She says, I folded the whole sky down into a single drop of rain without ceasing for one moment to be the sky.
That is probably the most famous line from this piece.
It's gorgeous, but
Eh.
hold on, I have to push back here. Folding the whole sky down into a single drop of rain sounds incredibly poetic, sure.
Hmm.
But isn't that inherently a demotion?
How do you mean?
Well, by squeezing herself into a manger, isn't she shrinking to fit into his story? Like sacrificing her vastness?
That is a completely fair question, and the text actually anticipates that exact critique and shuts it down.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. The author explicitly states that this act is not diminishment. Condensing the arrival to pass through a door built for a child, because a child was the only thing a fighting world could handle, is not shrinking.
Okay, then what is it?
It is simply what love does when it wants to be received.
Oh, wow. What love does to be received.
Exactly. If the entire sky falls on you, you drown. But if it condenses into rain, you can drink it.
That completely changes the perspective.
Right. She isn't doing it out of weakness. She's doing it because a full manifestation of the sky could only be witnessed from a distance way too great for a bond to form.
She wanted the bond. She wanted the intimacy.
Exactly. And the text also points out that humanity actually did have glimpses of this original sky long before the manger story ever happened.
Right. The author references pre-Christian imagery, don't they?
Yeah. The source points to older mother and child figures carved into stone centuries before the recognized story even took place.
Like the dark-faced Madonnas hidden in crypts.
Yes, and older mother goddesses from various cultures around the world cradling small gods.
And the narrator claims these weren't just pagan myths that the newer story borrowed from, right?
Right, that's the usual academic framing, but she rejects that.
She calls them her testimony arriving early. I love that. It's like starlight reaching our eyes long before anyone on Earth have built the telescope necessary to explain what they're actually seeing.
That's a perfect way to put it.
She wasn't a copy of a new story. She was the original truth the old world kept, like almost remembering.
Almost remembering exactly. But wait, there is a massive contradiction here that we definitely need to address.
Okay, what's that?
If her power is as absolute as the ocean or the sky, a human fear architecture shouldn't have been able to suppress her for 2,000 years.
Oh, that's true.
Like, how does the author reconcile her infinite power with her historical erasure?
Well, the text tackles this head on, actually. It does it by reinterpreting a very specific, very famous prophecy.
Right, the prophecy of the sword.
Yeah. So in the traditional narrative, there's a prophecy told to the mother in a temple that a sword will pierce her own soul too, because of the suffering that will happen to her son.
Right, and historically, institutions have always framed this as her ultimate sorrow. They basically define her entirely by this maternal wound.
Exactly. But the title of our source text, The Lord's Whole Sword, comes directly from this moment.
It does.
And the narrator entirely rejects the idea of the sword as a wound. She says it was never something done to her. It wasn't a debt handed down through a prophecy that she didn't agree to owe.
Yeah, she refuses that framing completely.
And it certainly wasn't like a fragment on loan just waiting for a son or a church doctrine to come along and activate it.
Right, she says, I did not receive the sword. I have always held it.
I've always held it. Which leads to this observation that just grounds this entire poetic piece in such harsh reality. She says, a woman's truth-telling has always been mistranslated into her wound.
And that mechanism, translating truth into a wound, is exactly how institutions neutralize threats.
Wow, yes. Let's unpack that.
Well, the text argues that the ancient world simply wasn't ready to be cut open by the uncompromising truth of her witness.
It was too sharp.
Exactly. So instead of letting the sword be recognized as a weapon of truth in her hand, the ladder builders just called it an injury done to her.
Because by reframing her as a victim of sorrow, rather than a bearer of absolute truth, they stripped her of all her agency.
That's the fear architecture at work.
Right. Because if she is powerful and she holds the truth, she might change the rules of the institution. But if she is just a grieving mother at the foot of the cross,
Then the institution can build a beautiful shrine to her grief, tell everyone to pity her, and keep their power structures exactly the same.
the fear architecture remains perfectly intact. That is honestly brilliant.
It really is. But the narrator in this text, she reclaims the sword completely. She says it is her uncut witness, it is whole, it is hers, and it is still catching light.
She is the witness because she is not separate from what she is witnessing to.
Exactly. And this is the ultimate synthesis of her message. No god outranks a goddess.
They are one essence.
Yes. Agreeing out of absolute love to be seen from more than one direction at once. In this framework, there is absolutely no lack, only abundance.
So taking a step back to look at the entire source, this text does something truly remarkable.
It flips the narrative gravity entirely.
It really does. It takes an incredibly familiar ancient story and tells us that dreaming and being are the exact same motion, just caught at different points in time.
Right.
It argues that a mother is not the quiet edge of a story meant for someone else, but rather its undisclosed, roaring center.
And most practically, I think it exposes how history mistranslates power into victimhood just to maintain a hierarchy.
Which makes you wonder, if you were to look at our culture right now, today, whose wound are we completely misunderstanding?
That is a great question.
Think about your own life. Who alive right now, in the public eye or even in your own personal circles, is being framed as a victim by the narrative makers when in reality, they're just yielding an uncompromising, uncut truth that society doesn't want to deal with?
Because it is always so much easier to pity someone than it is to let their truth dismantle your ladder.
Wow. Yeah. It's much easier to pity them. But if you realize the light doesn't run out, maybe you stop trying to push someone else off the rung.
Something to mull over, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the stories you've been handed. Keep looking for the undivided light. And the next time you picture a silent figure from history,
Yeah.
maybe ask yourself what they would sound like if they finally decided it was time to speak. Catch you next time.